All right, so this video is about Chapter 3. This chapter actually starts off with a description of the trait theory of leadership, which basically states that people are going to be born with certain characteristics, such as socioeconomic status, intelligence, and personality. And if certain characteristics are then associated with leaders, then people born with those types of characteristics are likely to become leaders, and those born without them will likely not become leaders. So again, trait theory asserts that traits of leaders may evolve over time to align with societal norms, but one would not be able to be trained necessarily as a leader because they're born with the characteristics or not. So this is a highly contentious issue, but bear with me here on this. All right. The authors of our text claim that if we extend this theory to information processing, the cognitive processes that go on, as humans are relating to and remembering one another, then having a particular trait may not necessarily affect a person's behavior. So that could be read, becoming a good leader. Having a particular trait may not necessarily affect whether a person becomes a good leader, but it could affect how others perceive and categorize that person as a non-leader or a leader. So having particular traits would enhance whether or not people think you've got leadership potential. So when thinking about perceptions of leaders, these perceptions could come from subordinates, superiors, peers, or other groups like customers. Okay, there are three elements or pieces of information that are taken into that affect essentially leadership perceptions. So the first piece of information is going to be the task context. So the environment in which the behavior is being demonstrated in. The second component is the potential leader's characteristics. So the physical characteristics, their demographics, specific bits of information about the individual themselves. And then the third component is actually the individual who is observing the potential leader or that rater's experience and history with leadership, and so how essentially they define what a leader should be like. All right, so a fundamental concept in perceptions is whether the perceiver is actually processing the information about the potential leader in an automatic or a controlled way. So automatic processing means that decisions or judgments will be made even when attention and motivation are placed elsewhere. And focused on non-related activities to that evaluation or judgment process. So for instance, you could have a new boss come in the door, and you're actually, working in a meeting and you're hosting a video conference, and, so you're pretty busy doing what you need to do. But you might see them through the glass, watch them moving around in the background, getting settled into the office, and you start to make judgments about that person before you even meet them. But it's not something that you're doing really consciously generally. You're not focusing on just this, oh, is this person going to be a good leader? Because you're focusing on your discussion that you are currently leading in this meeting. So this type of processing, automatic processing, does not require a lot of effort or intent on the individual's behalf. It is a limited processing situation. Now, controlled processing requires more awareness about the process of making that type of judgment. And so if you're going to really want to know about a new boss and their leadership abilities, then you really need to be intentional and take a lot of time and put a lot of effort into this process in order to facilitate a more rational type of decision making. So maybe you were the one that hired the new boss, and you want to make sure that they're going to be effective in their job. So they're on a several week initiation period, and you're reviewing them during that process. That is controlled processing or evaluating of this individual, and you're more likely to do that when you're actually on the hiring committee or reviewing lots of information on the candidates for the leadership position, as opposed to being one of the people in that meeting that has nothing to do with that. At that point, you are likely to use information provided by the applicant, information from references, and maybe even a Google search to get a good understanding of the applicant and their abilities. So either limited capacity or controlled processing could be used when categorizing a new supervisor in the situation of coming in the first day of work. However, limited processing is more likely to occur since most of the workers in that organization or in that setting are not likely to be on the selection committee or evaluating the person coming in. Most of them are going to be in their work environment and therefore are too busy with other things, i.e. their job, that is not necessarily dealing with this new person, looking up information about them and how well we think they're going to be a supervisor. So most of the time, as humans, when we're making judgments like this, we are on automatic processing situations. So please know that when we talk about pre-existing knowledge structures in leadership, we are talking about our past experience with that particular leadership type. This is known as an ILT, or an implicit leadership theory. In other words, an ILT is a person's belief about what makes up a leader in a particular context. When this happens, a person may be observed having certain characteristics or behaviors at first when the perceiver is categorizing them. But after that, the implicit leadership theory, or the idea of how a person with that particular label, as a leader or not, will act, is going to take over, essentially allowing us, the perceivers, to use less cognitive resources when evaluating or judging the individual in the future, because we want to make things simple, because we're lazy and we satisfy. So instead of using new information about a leader's behavior, we're going to just fall on what we expect them to be doing based on what we've already experienced them to do. So, for example, if you have placed a person into the category of a great leader, and then working with that person, they exhibit behaviors that are typical of not a very good leader, so just a bad leader. As the perceiver, you're going to be less likely to, one, observe the negative behaviors that the leader demonstrates, because we're not looking for those negative behaviors, and they don't conform to our expectations, so we might just not see them. And then the second thing is we're going to likely internalize the negative behaviors, since they are likely to be written off by the perceiver, such as the leader is new, or still learning, or I bet they have a strategic reason for performing that bad. So we're essentially just writing off the bad behaviors and making it fit into a good leader box, even though they're demonstrating that they're not. So only after time and a lot of observed negative behaviors, or after 100 young leaders, as we had the example before, will the external information start to change how that focal leader is going to be categorized. So it just takes a lot longer, and we need a lot more damning information once we have them categorized as a good leader, when we're automatically processing, to actually get them placed into the bad leader box. And so we're perceiving them good even when they're not. All right, so in this chapter, as well as throughout the entire book, the authors give examples using research and statistics to solidify their theory. This is going to be daunting for some, and I just want you to know that you do not have to understand the statistics behind what they are doing. I just want you to skim over these examples, get a basic understanding of the point that they are trying to make, and then move on. You don't need to know the details. Don't get bogged down in them. Unless I point to something, like in these videos, that you specifically need to understand, don't worry about it too much. Basic information pulled out of the chapters only. All right, let's talk about outcomes. Outcomes are likely to change perceptions about leaders. And this is also in the chapter. So outcomes are likely to change actually perceptions faster than leaders' newly emerged characteristics or behaviors are going to have impacting the perception of that leader. So for example, on page 42, the authors describe an election situation where they studied a variety of candidates, and they found some to be perceived as a political or a prototypical leader. But once they lost the race and they reevaluated them on the same measures, then their leadership ratings were obviously negatively impacted. They weren't seen as prototypical because they did not win. Another example would be the CEO of a company that had to file for bankruptcy. These organizational leaders usually lose their jobs when put into that situation, whether the bankruptcy was their fault or not, due to loss of credibility with their stakeholders. You're not seen as a leader anymore, or at least not an effective one for our organization, so you got to get out. So outcomes tend to have a larger or quicker impact on how a person is categorized than their actual behaviors are going to have. All right, so let's go ahead and shift topics for a second and talk about family resemblance and Q validity for a quick moment. Thinking back to different characteristics that make up a superordinate category, those characteristics that are widely shared across the different basic levels, again, so for leadership it would be political versus organizational versus religious leaders, these are going to be having some widely shared characteristics, and those widely shared characteristics are known as family resemblance. So what would we say before? There might be a characteristic between organizational, political, and military leaders, but there is no necessarily overlap with say religious leaders. Another good one, example of family resemblance for leadership would be intelligence. No matter what type of leader a person is categorized as, we generally see them as needing to be intelligent. Let's give another example too, just to make sure that we're all on the same page. So if we think about the category birds, birds generally have 2 feet, which would be a family resemblance characteristic. But birds also have feathers, and this particular trait is going to be rare outside of the category birds. In other words, there are not many animals in the world that have feathers, but some animals do have 2 legs. The rare instances or examples or traits, like the feather example, are known as Q validity. So to recap, again, we have family resemblance if within a category, most of these different groups have that particular trait, and it goes across the different categories. But if there is a specific trait that, if you look outside of that entire filing cabinet and you don't see other categories having this particular, or filing cabinets that have this particular trait, like feathers, then that is Q validity, saying, oh, well, I found something with a feather, it must be a bird, and you go instantly to the bird filing cabinet. So the processes of Q validity and family resemblance help us to sort multiple complex pieces of information that is being perceived in an appropriate way, and to help us put it in the right category, essentially.